Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a Screencast-O-Matic presentation and recording for the warm-ups for the first half of the cycle for the last warm-up packet cycle of the second quarter. Let's go and get started as we begin a new brief unit on interest groups and public opinion. Before we get started, once again, please let me go over some ground rules. Please make sure that you copy down the question in full and the answers in full, and remember to format your answers in a different color before submission. Let's go and get started. So, this first question of the day comes from the first lesson for this particular unit. What exactly are interest groups and how do they affect American government? So while you type down that question, let me just explain. The reason why we're fitting in this unit at this time of the year is because it's important for you guys to know, before we delve deeper into the legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch for the rest of the year, that you have a basic understanding of some of the factors outside of those branches that affect what happens inside. And in a large way, public opinion and interest groups do affect the functionality of our government. Let me explain. A simple definition of what an interest group is, they're just groups that use various forms of advocacy on public and for public officials. So think about it like this. If you want to see something done in your government, the best way to do that might be to team up with somebody to form a faction or a majority and to put pressure on people in government to do something about that issue. They ultimately try to shape public opinion too for people who may not know much about that particular said issue and try to get them on your side. Additionally, interest groups try to shape public policy coming from government officials directly. So, for example, if you're a member of the Sierra Club, you might want to advocate an issue about green energy or conservation and take that to your local elected official and maybe hope that it rises to national attention. Additionally, interest groups use different methods for attention, from lobbying, of course lobbyists are really important to understanding government, we'll get more into that later, testifying in court on particular issues, or protesting. Sometimes interest groups are renowned for their unique methods of gaining attention and traction. Interest groups involve themselves in campaigns too for politicians, and this is really important for you guys to know because interest groups in many ways have a lot of power over our politicians and elected officials. What they stand for and what they fall for in many ways is due in part to interest groups. Also, the motives for action based on political, religious, moral, social, or commercial aspects are really important. Understanding why and how certain interest groups act and exist and persist is really important to understand the story of our government. So there you guys have it. Those are some of the key things that I want you to know about interest groups. And with that being said, you should be able to not only move on to the lesson, but also to move on to the next question too when you're ready. Let's move on to the next question of the day from Thursday and Friday, and this will be from 114 to 115. In what ways are interest groups controversial? How can they both be good and bad? So while you type down that question, the reason why I asked this particular question is because interest groups in our government in many ways make democracy work, but some would argue that they often pose a huge hurdle to getting things done and also, of course, to the narrative of politics as well. So we're going to try to talk about some of those things right now. You know, one of the biggest factors that makes interest groups controversial is the fact that interest groups raise a lot of money, which can alter politics and the actions of our politicians. So, for example, the National Rifle Association, or the NRA, does have a huge role to play in our elected officials and how they see certain laws and actions justified. Another factor that's important for you guys to know is that the amount of money can make politicians beholden to a particular group. So, for example, you could pick any other interest group. If you look at say controversial interest groups about the Me Too movement, they might look at particular issues involving women's rights. Additionally, those types of people and those types of groups might pressure politicians to act in a certain way that is beneficial to them. Another factor is this: interest groups can be radical and push for rather unique ideas. So, for example, think about some of the groups and factions that exist on the political spectrum. Not everybody is moderate or centralized, so they might have different far radical views that they try to represent in government. And this can be both good and bad for our conversation and narrative, and also for our politicians and their corresponding actions. Another positive here, though, that I'd like to point out before we get to the negative is that interest groups consolidate people in our democracy. You know, some people say that they're only one voice or one person and can't get anything done. But the reality is, if you want to get something done, you should conglomerate with other people to get something done. And that's what's beautiful about this process. Another positive here is that interest groups link people to elected officials effectively. So, for example, interest groups often will put pressure, like I said, on elected officials, and that's one of the best ways to see change in this country. Because we ourselves don't get direct votes in Congress, we have to somehow reach our elected representatives, and this is one of the best ways to do so. One of the glaring negatives, though, of interest groups is that there's way too much money in politics, most people would agree anyway. And the activity of lobbyists and money going to and from certain groups to certain politicians is not transparent and tenuous at best. So it's really important for us, of course, to raise greater awareness, if you will, on this particular issue. And so money in politics often leads to corruption. Only time will tell how certain interest groups will act and how that'll affect certain politicians. But you, as a young citizen, deserve to know that they exist and really should pay attention to some of the factors that combine to form their good and bad aspects in our democracy. So thank you very much for tuning in, and good luck with completing now the rest of the lessons and the rest of the warm packet cycle when it's posted later. Thank you.